The story begins when the narrator wakes up to find Karen from the HOA claiming his private beach as public property without his consent. Despite having legal ownership, the narrator is painted as a greedy villain by Karen, who rallies the neighborhood against him. Karen manipulates the situation by hosting an emergency HOA meeting and installing fake surveillance to portray the narrator as a trespasser. The narrator faces mounting social pressure, public shaming, and underhanded tactics from the HOA. Realizing he cannot rely on legal documents alone, he starts to think of a more creative way to fight back. How did a quiet morning on a private beach spiral into a chaotic battle for freedom and dignity? Let us walk you through the incredible story that unfolded. I woke up to a sound so alien to my usual peaceful mornings that for a moment I genuinely thought I was dreaming. Not the sweet songs of birds or the distant hush of ocean waves, but the relentless, rhythmic pounding of hammers. Disoriented, I stumbled out onto my deck, sloshing coffee all over the front of my t-shirt, and stared in utter disbelief at the scene playing out below. There stood Karen from the HOA, unmistakable in her giant floppy sun hat, triumphantly hammering a giant wooden sign into the sand. The sign, bold and new, declared community beach access, HOA property. My brain stuttered for a moment as I tried to process it. Behind her, a swarm of clipboard-wielding HOA members moved like a coordinated military unit, driving posts into the pristine sands of what was undeniably, indisputably, legally my private beach. I rubbed my eyes furiously, almost convinced that I must still be trapped in some bizarre nightmare, but when I reopened them, the reality was even worse. Karen caught sight of me standing there, barefoot and stunned, and gave me the smuggest little wave I had ever seen. Without missing a beat, she grabbed a bullhorn and, in a voice that rattled the seagulls from their posts, announced that today marked a new era of community spirit. As if that wasn't enough to leave me dumbfounded, she followed it up by shouting, as voted unanimously by the HOA, "This beach now belongs to the people." My coffee cup slipped from my fingers, thudding into the sand below, mirroring exactly how my peaceful life seemed to sink in that very moment. Without thinking, I charged down the steps, still half-dressed and dripping coffee, dodging overly enthusiastic volunteers who shoved pamphlets about shared coastal resources into my hands. Karen intercepted me, holding her clipboard against her chest like a shield, and announced in a voice dripping with condescension that the HOA had unanimously voted to declare my property a public trust zone. I stood there blinking at her, trying to absorb the sheer absurdity of what she was saying, before calmly suggesting she might want to see my property deed. She wrinkled her nose at me as if I had just offered her a rotting fish, dismissing my suggestion with a huff about how community enrichment was more important than outdated paperwork. I bit down the immediate urge to laugh in her face. Instead, I turned on my heel, stomped back into my house, and ripped the framed original deed from my office wall. Still dripping coffee and rage, I marched back down to the sand and thrust the deed in front of her face. Karen peered at the official seal and legal jargon like she was trying to read an ancient cryptic prophecy, then announced in a voice loud enough to draw a crowd that my so-called ownership was irrelevant because the community's need outweighed individual greed. Greed, because apparently, buying a property with your hard-earned money was now a criminal offense. The situation spiraled faster than a hurricane hitting shore. Within hours, Karen had set up an emergency HOA meeting right there on the beach, complete with rows of folding chairs, a pop-up tent for shade, and free lemonade to lure curious neighbors. I stood off to the side, arms crossed and blood boiling, as Karen spun an elaborate sob story about how I was selfishly hoarding the beach from hardworking families and depriving future generations of their birthright. She painted me not just as a villain but as some sort of cartoonish miser, shaking my fist at the ocean and shouting mine like a deranged pirate. It was almost impressive, the way she distorted reality to suit her narrative. The crowd, many of whom had likely never even realized that beach access was an issue until this moment, was eating it up. They began chanting slogans like "Open the beach" and "Down with greed," their voices rising in a unified chorus of misdirected anger. I half expected someone to start passing out pitchforks and torches any minute. I retreated to my porch, watching the circus unfold, my heart hammering against my ribs with a mixture of rage and disbelief. I could not believe how fast one woman with a clipboard and a megaphone could turn my life upside down. Just when I thought it couldn't get any more ridiculous, it did. That night, under the cover of darkness, I caught 2 HOA board members sneaking onto my property. They were installing tiny security cameras disguised as fake rocks and setting up no trespassing signs that, ironically, pointed at me, the legal owner. I filmed them from my porch, struggling to suppress laughter because the whole scene was so absurd it could have been a Saturday Night Live sketch. They were trying to build a case against me, portraying me as a trespasser on my own land. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Karen was relentless, waging a full-blown propaganda campaign. She knocked on doors, cornered people at the grocery store, harassed them at gas stations, even handed out petitions at my favorite taco truck. She rallied a movement she called the Beach Liberation Initiative, handing out cheaply printed flyers accusing me of being the Grinch of the coastline. Meanwhile, every time I dared to step foot onto my own beach, the burning stares of neighbors followed me like 1,000 daggers. I had become the town pariah overnight. The tipping point came when I found a crumpled, poorly made flyer taped to my mailbox. Scrawled across it in garish block letters were the words "Stop the Beach Hog. Reclaim what's ours," complete with an unflattering cartoon depiction of me with devil horns, clearly drawn in crayon by someone with the artistic skill of a drunken raccoon. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling a cocktail of anger, sadness, and bitter humor wash over me. It was at that moment I realized this wasn't just about the beach anymore. Karen and her clipboard-wielding army weren't just trying to steal a piece of land. They were trying to humiliate me, to strip away my dignity, to break me down until I surrendered. That night, I sat alone on the cool sand, staring out at the moonlit waves, my heart a furnace of frustration and helplessness. I considered every option. I could fight them through endless legal battles. I could call the sheriff and slap them with trespassing lawsuits. I could spend months, maybe years, caught in a bitter war of documents and court dates. But then, somewhere between rage and despair, a better idea began to take root. A wild, audacious, borderline insane idea that, the more I thought about it, the more it made me want to laugh for the first time in days. If they wanted a public beach so badly, I would give them one. Oh, I would give them one they would never, ever forget. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and found Duke's number. Duke, my old college buddy, now the president of the National Surfing Federation. He picked up on the first ring, and as I breathlessly outlined what had been happening and what I was planning, he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his phone. When he finally caught his breath, he said, "Dude, you are absolutely insane." "I love it. Let's do it." Sitting there under the stars, the phone still pressed to my ear, I realized something critical. Karen had started a war she was utterly unprepared for. She thought she could bully me into submission with flyers and angry mobs. She thought she could weaponize the community against me without consequence. Fine. If she wanted a circus, she was about to get the biggest, wildest, most unforgettable circus she had ever seen. The ocean roared behind me, as if it too was cheering me on, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. Not a smile of anger, not a smile of bitterness, but the kind of wicked, joyful smile that only comes when you know deep down you're about to turn the tables in a way your enemy could never anticipate. And just like that, the game was on. The next morning came fast, and with it a spark of excitement that raced through my veins like caffeine on an empty stomach. I woke before the sunrise, standing on my deck with a hot mug of coffee in hand, watching the first hints of light chase the darkness away. The ocean shimmered like a silver mirror under the early dawn, and I could almost hear it whispering to me, urging me forward. Today was the day everything would change. I had no idea how the town would react once they saw what I had planned, but at that point, I did not care. I had spent days being the villain in a story written by Karen and her HOA minions, and I was more than ready to flip the script. Duke did not waste a single second after our phone call. By the time I went to bed the night before, he had already lined up major sponsors, a roster of professional surfers, an entire food vendor court, a local radio station for live broadcasting, and even convinced a few celebrity surfers to make guest appearances. He pulled in favors like a magician pulling rabbits from hats. This was no longer just a friendly surfing event. This was an official national qualifier, and it was going to happen entirely on my beach. My once peaceful, supposedly hoarded little strip of sand was about to become the beating heart of the surfing world for one glorious weekend. By noon, delivery trucks began rolling into town like an army preparing for a siege. Enormous black trailers with shiny logos parked along my property line, unloading a ridiculous array of equipment, towering stages, tents big enough to house a circus, portable restrooms, catering setups that smelled like heaven, and so much surf gear that it looked like someone had raided every sporting goods store on the West Coast. Workers in neon vests swarmed the beach, driving stakes into the sand, setting up giant speakers, marking competition zones with colorful flags, and laying walkways through the dunes for food trucks and booths. It was a beautiful, chaotic ballet of construction, and I loved every second of it. Neighbors slowed their cars to a crawl as they drove past, craning their necks so hard I thought someone might get whiplash. You could practically feel the ripple of curiosity spread through the town like a wildfire. I stood on my deck, sipping my second cup of coffee, wearing the most neutral expression I could manage, watching the gossip network ignite. It did not take long before the inevitable happened. Karen stormed onto the beach around mid-afternoon, a human thundercloud wrapped in a ridiculous, oversized sun hat, clutching her ever-present clipboard like it was a weapon. She was flanked by her two most loyal minions, who scurried behind her like anxious ducklings. Karen's face was a shade of furious red that I had previously only seen on cartoon characters. She stomped right up to me, sputtering demands for answers, accusations about unauthorized construction, environmental destruction, community code violations, and whatever other nonsense she could throw at the wall to see what stuck. I let her rant, watching her with calm amusement, as if she were an angry little terrier barking at a mountain. When she finally paused for breath, I calmly produced a thick folder and handed it to her. Inside were copies of every permit and authorization I had secured from the county, meticulously organized and legally airtight. Permits for private events, permits for temporary structures, permits for food vendors, noise ordinances, parking overflow management, environmental impact assessments. You name it, I had it. Karen's hands trembled as she rifled through the documents, desperately searching for some flaw she could exploit, but there were none. I had anticipated every move she could make and blocked it before she even thought of it. Defeated but unwilling to show it, she slammed the folder shut with a snap and spun on her heel, retreating back across the sand as workers continued setting up around her. I watched her go with a small, satisfied smile. For once, the clipboard queen had nothing left to say. Over the next 2 days, my private beach transformed into something out of a dream. Massive colorful flags snapped in the breeze. Sponsor booths sprouted like mushrooms, selling everything from custom surfboards to branded energy drinks. Food trucks lined the perimeter offering gourmet burgers, street tacos, fresh smoothies, and artisan coffee that made my mouth water from 3 tents away. It was vibrant, loud, exciting, and absolutely glorious. The local news vans started arriving, setting up their satellite dishes and interviewing stunned locals who could not believe such a massive event had appeared practically overnight. Most of the townspeople were thrilled. The economic boost was immediate and undeniable. Restaurants reported record sales. Ice cream shops had lines out the door. The gas stations sold out of ice faster than they could restock it. Hotels posted full occupancy signs for the first time in years. Kids ran laughing through the sand while surfers strutted around with boards under their arms, the whole beach buzzing with an energy that could not be contained. Karen, however, was decidedly not amused. She was furious, her anger burning so brightly it could have powered a small city. She set up a sad little protest station at the far edge of the property, complete with a handmade sign that read "Save Our Beach, Stop the Chaos." She passed out gloomy flyers accusing me of ruining the environment, corrupting local youth, and destroying the peaceful character of the community. A few of her die-hard followers huddled around her under the brutal midday sun, looking more miserable with each passing hour. Most people barely spared them a glance. As I made my rounds, checking on setups and logistics, an unexpected figure flagged me down. Mr. Jenkins, one of the quieter HOA board members, a thin, balding man who always seemed to blend into the background during meetings. He leaned in conspiratorially, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, and whispered that Karen was not done yet. She was organizing something bigger, something desperate. A blockade, he said. Karen was planning to physically block the entrance road with construction equipment to stop the event. I thanked him, my mind already racing ahead to countermeasures. Karen's level of petty insanity was truly something to behold. I called Duke immediately and filled him in. He laughed so hard I thought he might drop the phone again, but promised to reinforce event security and document everything just in case things got messy. He also mentioned, with no small amount of glee, that a handful of off-duty sheriff's deputies would be attending the event as spectators and would be more than happy to lend a hand if needed. Knowing that Karen was walking herself into a legal nightmare made me sleep better than I had in weeks. The night before the competition officially began, the beach lit up like a festival. Bonfires dotted the shoreline. Guitars strummed under the stars. A famous surfer gave a live demo in the shimmering moonlight, carving through the waves with effortless grace. Families picnicked on blankets, laughing and chatting. Couples walked hand in hand along the tide line. It was everything I loved about the beach multiplied by 100. Across the sand, Karen's protest station looked pathetically small. Her followers dwindled to a handful of grumpy retirees glaring at the festivities. The next morning arrived with the kind of electric energy you could feel in your bones. Even before sunrise, trucks were pulling into temporary parking lots, surfers unloading boards, vendors firing up grills. The sun crested the horizon in a blaze of gold and pink, casting long shadows over a beach already alive with motion. I stood near the entrance, sipping my coffee and soaking it all in. Families poured in with umbrellas and coolers. Surfers waxed boards and stretched on the sand. Reporters hovered near the judge's booth, cameras rolling. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. I had not seen Karen yet, but I knew she would come. She could not resist a chance to cause a scene. Sure enough, just as the first heat of the competition kicked off with surfers dancing across glassy waves, I heard the familiar shriek of her voice cutting through the celebration. Karen stormed onto the beach wearing a neon vest emblazoned with the words Community Watch Captain, her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand and a megaphone in the other. Behind her trudged her few remaining loyalists, carrying hastily made signs that flapped pitifully in the breeze. She tried to block a young surfer carrying his board toward the water, planting herself stubbornly in his path. The kid sidestepped her with all the effort of someone dodging a beach ball, barely sparing her a glance. Undeterred, Karen pivoted and lunged at another group, but slipped spectacularly on a patch of wet sand. She landed face-first into a child's elaborate sandcastle with a loud splat that sent a ripple of gasps through the crowd, followed immediately by a wave of laughter. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. A nearby news crew captured the entire glorious spectacle. Within minutes, the footage was already spreading across social media under the hashtag #SandyKaren. Karen scrambled to her feet, face redder than ever, sputtering with rage, but the damage was irreparable. Every time she tried to rally her protest, another group of spectators laughed, pointed, or whipped out their phones. Her credibility crumbled faster than the sandcastle she had destroyed. But Karen, in true Karen fashion, was not done. Later that afternoon, just as the junior division finals were wrapping up, a loud rumble echoed from the entrance road. A convoy of heavy construction equipment crawled into view: bulldozers, cement mixers, even a crane. For a moment my heart froze, thinking maybe there had been an accident. But then I spotted Karen standing proudly by the roadside, arms crossed in smug triumph. She had orchestrated the whole thing. Her plan was simple and idiotic. Block the entrance, cut off access, shut down the competition. Unfortunately for her, she had overlooked a few minor details, like needing permits to block a private property entrance and, actual legal authority. I calmly walked over to the event security booth, handed over the ownership paperwork and event permits, and within minutes the sheriff's deputies on site made the necessary calls. Half an hour later, official squad cars rolled up, lights flashing. Deputies began issuing citations for illegal obstruction and trespassing. The contractors, realizing they had been duped into a lawsuit disaster, scrambled to move their equipment and tore into Karen with angry shouts before driving away in a cloud of dust. Karen stood alone by the side of the road, red-faced and shaking with fury, as the beach erupted into cheers behind her. The competition surged on, unaffected. Surfers rode wave after wave to roaring applause. Families picnicked and shopped at vendor booths. Reporters captured every heartwarming moment. Karen's attempted sabotage had only made the festival even more legendary. Businesses made record profits. Hotels booked out months in advance for next year's event. Even skeptical locals who had worried about the crowds admitted that the boost to the town's economy and spirit was worth every second. Karen tried one final desperate move that evening as the awards ceremony kicked off. She filed for an emergency injunction, crying environmental damage, noise violations, and unlawful assembly. It might have worked had she not listed the wrong parcel number, misspelled half the documents, and filed them in the wrong courthouse. The judge dismissed her request before lunch, citing insufficient evidence and procedural failure. Word spread immediately. Karen, once the queen of clipboards, was now the town's most famous laughingstock. I watched her slink away up the beach, head bowed low, as the sun dipped in a blaze of fire and glory behind the victorious champions standing atop the podium. The crowd roared. Cameras flashed. The ocean roared along with us, and in that moment, I knew something deeper had shifted. We had not just defended a beach. We had reclaimed something greater: our spirit, our pride, our freedom. And the best part was, the weekend was just getting started. The morning after the surf competition, the beach looked like a battlefield won by joy and exhaustion. Volunteers packed up tents and equipment while food trucks rolled out, their tires kicking up little puffs of sand. Surfers, sunburned and smiling, strapped boards to their vans and traded fist bumps under the still rising sun. I walked among them offering high fives and heartfelt thanks, my chest so full of pride it felt like I might float right off the sand. The energy was still electric, the aftershocks of the festival's success, buzzing in every handshake and laugh. It had gone better than I ever dared to imagine, despite every trick Karen had thrown at us. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the chaos was behind me. Maybe Karen had finally realized she was beaten. Maybe she would accept her loss and slink back into whatever angry little hole she crawled out from. But deep down, in the pit of my gut, I knew better. Karen was not the type to admit defeat gracefully. Later that afternoon, after a lazy lunch and a long shower to scrub off 2 days' worth of sand and sweat, I was scrolling through my phone when a news alert caught my eye. At first, I thought it was another recap of the competition. Local news celebrates unprecedented surf event success. But the headline below it hit like a lightning bolt. HOA scandal exposed. Board members caught in land grab scheme. I sat up so fast I spilled my water all over the couch. The article was explosive. A local investigative reporter had dug into the HOA's recent activities and discovered that Karen, along with several other key board members, had been quietly scheming for months to seize my beach. Their plan was not about community access or family picnics by the water. It was about money. Dirty, greedy money. They intended to wrest control of the beach from me under the guise of public good and then immediately lease it to a luxury developer for a multi-million-dollar condo project. Exclusive beachfront units, private docks, a gated coastal compound. They had already drafted secret agreements and held closed-door meetings with the developer's reps before the first hammer even hit the sand. My jaw clenched so tightly I thought I might crack a tooth. It was never about the community. It was always about lining their own pockets. Worse, the article included copies of leaked emails showing Karen negotiating kickbacks, special perks, and even priority condo placements for herself and her cronies. Reading those slimy messages made my skin crawl. The woman who had accused me of greed, who had painted herself as a selfless champion of the people, was nothing more than a snake in pearls. The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, every local media outlet had picked it up. It dominated social media feeds, front pages, and town gossip circles. Neighbors who had marched behind Karen chanting about community spirit now stood stunned, betrayed, and furious. People who had been neutral were now livid that they had been played for fools. Even members of the HOA board who had not been part of Karen's inner circle scrambled to distance themselves, issuing public statements and throwing her under the bus faster than you could say scandal. The town was on fire, but for once, I was not the one burning. That evening, a hastily organized group of homeowners gathered at the community center for an emergency meeting. Flyers had been taped to mailboxes and telephone poles calling for Karen's immediate removal. I showed up a little early, leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, watching the room fill to capacity. It was standing room only. Angry voices buzzed like angry hornets, accusations and disbelief flying back and forth. Karen showed up too, of course. She walked in wearing her usual sun hat, her posture rigid, her face set in a brittle mask of defiance. But there was fear in her eyes, a hunted look she could not quite hide. She climbed onto the makeshift stage at the front of the room and tried to launch into a speech about misunderstandings, good intentions, and fake news, but nobody was buying it. Boos drowned her out. Someone shouted from the back about the developer's reps being seen touring the neighborhood weeks before the beach drama ever started. Another neighbor held up printed copies of the leaked emails, waving them like a sword. Karen tried to bluster, tried to dodge, but it was no use. The evidence was too damning, the betrayal too raw. When the motion was called to remove her from her position, the vote was so lopsided it was almost comical. She was stripped of her title effective immediately, banned from holding any future leadership role in the HOA, and several homeowners called for the board to sue her personally for fraud and damages. Karen sat frozen in her chair, face pale, hands trembling, as the empire she had built on lies and manipulation crumbled around her. Watching her downfall should have felt satisfying, and in a way, it did. But there was something deeper too, something almost solemn about it. She had done this to herself. She had sown seeds of greed and deceit, and now was reaping a bitter harvest. It was not just justice. It was poetic justice. The fallout only grew in the days that followed. The state attorney general announced a formal investigation into the HOA for corruption and abuse of power. Subpoenas were issued. Financial records were seized. Several other board members who had been complicit in the scheme resigned in disgrace, hoping to avoid deeper scrutiny. The entire structure of the HOA was rocked to its core. What had once been a feared and controlling body was now little more than a punchline. I received a formal apology from the interim board, a letter so dripping with regret and humility that I almost felt sorry for them. They promised to respect all private property rights moving forward and asked if I would consider working with them to host future community events. They wanted to rebuild trust, they said, to show the town that not everyone in leadership was corrupt. I agreed, cautiously, not because I wanted to buddy up to them, but because I saw an opportunity to turn the beach into something even more special, a symbol of resilience, of standing up for what was right even when it was hard. Meanwhile, Karen's personal life imploded at the same breathtaking speed as her professional one. She became the face of greed in every headline, her photo plastered across memes and news articles alike. She lost her job at a local real estate firm within days. Her husband, reportedly fed up with her lies and scheming, filed for divorce. She became a social pariah, whispered about in grocery store aisles and pointed at in coffee shops. Rumors swirled that she was planning to leave town altogether, unable to bear the humiliation that clung to her like a bad smell. Every now and then I would see a car slow down in front of her house, snapping photos of the for sale signs that clustered like vultures on her lawn. I would watch from my porch, coffee in hand, resisting the urge to wave. But I did not feel cruel. I did not feel like gloating. Karen had made her choices. She had tried to steal something precious, something irreplaceable, and in the end, she had lost everything. In a strange, twisted way, I was grateful to her. She had exposed a rot that had festered beneath the surface of the community for years. She had shaken people awake, made them question authority, made them demand better. Her downfall had united the town in a way no HOA event or community barbecue ever could have. In trying to tear us apart, Karen had inadvertently brought us together stronger than ever. The beach itself recovered beautifully. Volunteers, both surfers and townspeople, helped restore it meticulously after the competition. Walkways were dismantled, trash collected, dunes smoothed back into place. Seabirds returned to their nesting grounds. The tide washed away footprints, leaving the sand pristine and untouched. There was no permanent damage, only the lasting glow of goodwill. Now, when families came to the beach, they asked permission first. They stayed on the public access paths. They picked up their trash. They treated the space with respect. The hostility, the suspicion, the bitterness that Karen had tried to cultivate faded, like morning mist under a rising sun. I would often find myself sitting out on the deck at sunset, a cold drink in hand, watching as kids built sandcastles and couples strolled hand in hand along the tide line. Sometimes a teenager would shout a cheerful thank you as they ran past with a surfboard under one arm. Sometimes an elderly couple would stop to chat and reminisce about how much the town had changed for the better. Those were the moments that made it all worth it. The sleepless nights, the gut-wrenching stress, the public humiliation. It all led to this, a stronger, kinder, more resilient community. Karen had tried to control the beach through fear and manipulation. I had defended it through defiance, creativity, and patience. And in the end, the beach remained free. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the town settled into a new rhythm. A better rhythm. People smiled more, lingered longer in conversations, treated each other like neighbors instead of enemies. The HOA, desperate to rebuild its shattered reputation, elected a new president, a retired firefighter named Mr. Daniels, known for his fairness and no-nonsense attitude. One of his first acts was to hold a town hall meeting where he publicly apologized for the chaos, formally recognized and honored all private property lines, and vowed transparency moving forward. It was a cathartic moment. People cheered, some cried, overwhelmed by the feeling that justice had finally been restored. My beach was more than just a piece of land now. It was a living reminder that standing up for what was right, even when it was hard and lonely and terrifying, could change everything for the better. As for Karen, she faded from our story like a bad memory. Word spread that she had moved 2 towns over, trying to outrun her disgrace. Rumor had it she was working a job as a parking lot attendant, a bitter twist of fate for someone who once dreamed of ruling over oceanside condos and community boardrooms. Sometimes at night, sitting around a fire with friends and neighbors, someone would bring her up as a joke, and we would laugh, Not cruelly, but with the kind of laughter that comes from surviving something hard together. Karen had lost everything trying to control the beach. We had gained everything by letting it stay free. And deep in my heart, I knew that no matter what battles might come in the future, we were ready. We were stronger. We were unbreakable. Weeks passed, and the town continued to evolve, almost as if shedding an old skin. The shadows Karen had cast over the community faded like the morning fog, leaving behind something lighter, freer, and far stronger than what existed before. It was not just about one beach anymore. It was about how people had reclaimed their dignity, their trust in one another, their right to decide what kind of community they wanted to be. The beach became a quiet symbol of that transformation, a living memory of a battle hard fought and well won. The HOA, desperate to rebuild its shattered reputation, elected new leadership with a clear message that the days of manipulation and backdoor deals were over. Mr. Daniels, the retired firefighter who took the reins, wasted no time proving he was cut from a different cloth. He organized a town hall meeting attended by almost every household in the area. Standing tall before the crowd, he delivered a heartfelt apology on behalf of the HOA, acknowledging the mistakes, the betrayal, and the deep wounds inflicted on the town. He vowed that from that day forward, transparency and fairness would be the guiding principles of everything they did. As part of that promise, the HOA passed new bylaws formally recognizing and protecting private property rights, including mine. Declarations were recorded publicly so there would be no more confusion, no more gray areas to exploit. It felt like a final wall being built against the chaos of the past, a stronghold made not of stone but of trust. People clapped and cheered, some even wiping away tears as if a great weight had finally been lifted off their shoulders. Meanwhile, my beach remained a place of peace, a sanctuary untouched by the ugliness that had once threatened it. Families continued to visit with permission, always respectful, always grateful. Surfers caught waves under the golden morning light, children built sandcastles with serious determination, couples strolled along the water's edge as sunsets painted the sky with impossible colors. It was everything I had fought for and more. Not just a beach preserved, but a spirit restored. Karen had practically disappeared from the town's collective memory. Last I heard, she had relocated to a town 2 counties over, working a job that barely paid the rent and stewing in bitterness. Her name had become a cautionary tale rather than a rallying cry. She was no longer the woman who could command a meeting room with a clipboard and a scowl. She was just another footnote in a story that had outgrown her entirely. One afternoon, a few months after the dust had fully settled, Duke called me with news that made me nearly drop my coffee mug. The National Surfing Federation was so impressed with the success of our competition that they wanted to make it an annual event. They offered to fund maintenance and improvements to the beach, set up a scholarship fund for local youth sports programs, and establish the Freedom Surf Festival as a permanent part of the national circuit. The deal was not just a handshake agreement. Contracts were drawn up carefully to guarantee that my ownership rights remained fully protected, while also ensuring that the event would bring resources and attention to the town every single year. I agreed without hesitation. It felt like the perfect evolution of everything we had built. What had started as an act of defiance, a way to stand up to petty tyranny, had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. Together we finalized the agreements, filed permits, and began planning the next big festival. Sponsors lined up eagerly, knowing that this event was not just about surfing anymore. It was about resilience, about community, about celebrating the spirit that refused to be broken. When the first annual Freedom Surf Festival arrived, it dwarfed even the original event in size and energy. Crowds tripled. Major sponsors set up sleek booths with free giveaways and bright banners flapping in the ocean breeze. Food trucks lined the perimeter, offering everything from gourmet seafood to street tacos to vegan smoothies. Families picnicked under colorful umbrellas, laughing and swapping stories. Kids took surfing lessons from world-class pros who treated them like little legends in the making. Live music echoed across the sand from a stage near the dunes where local bands and even a few big-name acts performed to roaring crowds. News outlets from across the state sent crews to cover the event, but this time they were not chasing scandal. They were celebrating transformation. Celebrities dropped by, posing for pictures, signing autographs, and making generous donations to the Beach Preservation Fund. The whole town pulsed with a joy that felt deeper than mere celebration. It felt like a reclamation of identity, a renewal of faith in each other. As I wandered through the festival grounds that weekend, I spotted Mr. Jenkins, the quiet former HOA board member who had tipped me off about Karen's last desperate blockade. He stood near the giant sandcastle competition, sipping lemonade and chuckling as kids scrambled to build towering structures. When he saw me, he gave a wide grin and a big thumbs up. We shared a quiet moment of understanding, a nod between two people who had seen the worst and helped carve a path back to something better. On the final night of the festival, as the sun dipped low over the horizon casting everything in molten gold, Duke called me up onto the main stage. He handed me a small commemorative plaque engraved with my name and the words "Defender of the Beach." The crowd erupted into cheers so loud they rattled the flags, snapping on the tents. I stood there for a moment, overwhelmed, taking it all in. The smiling faces, the roaring ocean behind me, the incredible journey that had brought us here. I had fought not with fists or lawsuits, but with creativity, stubbornness, and heart. And in doing so, I had helped the town find its soul again. That night, long after the last trophy was handed out and the final guitar chords faded into the warm night air, I sat around a bonfire with friends, neighbors, and surfers from all over. We passed around marshmallows on sticks, swapped stories, and laughed until our sides hurt. Someone cracked a joke about Karen trying to storm the beach again, and the entire circle erupted into howling laughter, the kind that shakes the stars loose from the sky. It felt good to laugh. It felt good to breathe easy, knowing that the darkness was truly behind us. As the embers glowed low and the last conversations drifted into a comfortable, companionable silence, I leaned back in my chair, stared up at the endless sweep of stars, and let it all sink in. I thought about how close I had come to losing everything. How easily fear and anger could have swallowed me whole if I had let them. But I had chosen another path. A harder one, maybe. A riskier one. But a path that had led to something bigger, something better, something lasting. The waves rolled in gently, whispering against the sand, timeless and eternal. The same waves that had kissed these shores long before any of us were born and would still be there long after we were gone. I realized then that the beach was never really mine to hoard or defend. It was something to protect, to cherish, to share with those who respected its beauty and its freedom. Karen had tried to seize it with control and fear and greed. She had lost everything. I had stood my ground with kindness, with creativity, with resilience. And in doing so, I had gained everything that truly mattered. The town thrived in the months and years that followed. Businesses boomed. Friendships deepened. The Freedom Surf Festival grew into a nationally recognized event, drawing visitors from across the country. The scholarship fund helped local kids chase dreams they might never have dared dream before. The beach became a symbol not just of resistance, but of renewal, of the incredible things that can happen when a community stands together. As for me, I never stopped standing on that deck with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the water, feeling the steady, comforting heartbeat of the ocean in my bones. I never took for granted the laughter of children playing in the surf, the nods of gratitude from surfers catching the early morning waves, the quiet smiles of neighbors walking hand in hand along the shore. I knew that life would not always be easy. There would be new battles, new storms to weather. But I also knew, deep down where it mattered most, that we were ready. That we were stronger than fear. That no clipboard, no bully, no greedy scheme could ever take from us what we had built together. This was our beach. Our town. Our spirit. And it was here to stay. The stars burned bright overhead as I closed my eyes, breathed in the salty air, and smiled. Because this was how it was always meant to be. And no one would ever take that away again.